Welcome to Landlord Diaries, where we talk about midterm rentals and the opportunities behind them. We'll share landlord stories, talk about maximizing investment potential, and discuss how to live the very best landlord life. This podcast is proudly brought to you by Furnished Finder, the place for everything midterm rentals. Remember to like and subscribe if you enjoy our content.
Welcome, welcome. It's your hosts of the Landlord Diaries, Kelly Bailey and Katie Lyon. And we just want to thank you for being here. We appreciate you guys listening. If you are enjoying our show, we would absolutely adore your 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And Katie, take it away. What do we got today?
Today we get to talk to Young, and he was really interesting to talk to, particularly because him and his wife have 13 doors in their portfolio, and they both work full-time W-2 jobs. And his job in particular, we didn't get into details about his wife's too much, but his in particular is a very high-stress job, I think. So they've really done some things to strategize the balance of long-term, mid-term, short-term, and we also get to talk a little bit more about their systems and how they manage all of these things. So this is great for anyone who is looking to scale, anyone who's looking to learn about systems, or anyone who's just sitting here thinking, how am I supposed to do it all? Because Young does it all, and with a very calm and collected approach, I will say, which I admire. So just a reminder to everyone, this episode and every episode is brought to you by Furnished Finder, where you can list your midterm furnished rental for $99 a year. And that includes unlimited leads, unlimited tenant communication. There's no limit to how many leases you can sign. It's just $99 a year. We keep it super, super simple so that you can succeed.
Young Wei owns 13 properties, 5 of which are furnished rentals, 2 triplexes, a quadruplex, and a mix of 1 to 4 bedroom single-family homes. Thank you so much for being on the show with us today, Young. How's it going?
It's going fantastic. Thank you for having me.
So I'm assuming you didn't just wake up one day and own 13 properties. So why don't you tell us about your journey of how you grew your portfolio and why you went after the certain strategies that you did?
Yeah, certainly. What we ended up today, which is 13 properties, is certainly not necessarily by design. I started out more than 10 years ago when I was looking for a home for myself, and was highly encouraged by a close friend of mine and a colleague that I should look into investment properties, in a multi-unit to find a home for myself and also bring in some income. Now, that first concept was introduced to me, and it was very foreign. It was very scary. I did not think that I was up for it. I did not think I would have enough money to do so. But through borrowing from family, borrowing from my 401k, and really kind of taking a leap of faith, I did it. And that was the first 4-unit complex that I acquired more than 10 years ago.
Amazing.
Yeah. And along the way, I've picked up additional investment properties, building on the success of the first unit.
So are you saying you actually did the opposite of most people and did not go after single family homes or duplexes first? You jumped straight to a 4-plex?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Wow, that's impressive.
To be frank, I definitely wanted a single family home to start for myself. Who doesn't? But I was really, again, highly encouraged by a friend and coach throughout the process, and she kind of really showed me the numbers of what it would mean if I own a home that I really liked for a single family, or versus a 2-unit or a 3-unit or a 4-unit, and walk me through kind of the financial implications of a 4-unit versus more units, and really helped me understand that the 4-unit was the sweet spot of investment real estate for smaller portfolios. It was very daunting. I was not a handy person. I think most people immediately think about, wow, I'm going to be unclogging toilets or fixing leaks, doing all kinds of things, which is somewhat true. Those things do come about. But I think for me, it was really important to have the support network and someone that I trusted who really encouraged me along the way.
Well, Young, I would love to hear some of the lessons that you have learned so far in your journey that you might want to pass on to other people who are just getting into the space or who are thinking about getting into the space. I know there is a big stigma about becoming a landlord. I know when we first became landlords a few years ago, everyone was like, are you sure? You might get calls at 2 a.m. and this and that. And do you want to be handling it? What if they destroy your property? And there's a lot of hesitations and I think a bad rap that it gets. And you're right, those things do happen. But I would love to hear your perspective on some lessons that you've learned along the way that maybe you wish you knew sooner.
Yeah, for sure. I think when I hear that question, my mind is drawn to different categories. For instance, a long-term rental versus a midterm rental versus a short-term rental are very different ball games, as you know. And I'll kind of hone in on more of the midterm rental area, if you will. I think that's for us kind of the sweet spot that we've been trying to drive our short-term furnished rentals into. And some of the lessons learned, I think broadly speaking, is really truly having backup plans for everything. Uh, Primary, secondary, and tertiary paths to success. Anything that can go wrong will most likely go wrong at some point when you're not expecting it. And to have another set of spare keys locked somewhere that only you can get to, or you can give instructions to, another set of bed sheets or towels that are locked in the basement just for an emergency. I think a lot of my examples about lessons learned is really about contingency building and building schedule margin as well. Meaning if you have back to back to back guests along the way, how do we schedule so that we have enough time for the cleaners? And even if there are particular issues that we need to be addressed, how do we build in some schedule margin so that we're not so rushed and somebody's coming and knocking on the door for their next check-in when the place is not ready?
Yes, that would not be good.
Yeah.
So in general, I believe out of your 13 properties, you currently use one for midterm rentals. So tell us about your property on Furnished Finder and how you operate your midterm rentals different than your other real estate investments.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. So we do have one listing on Furnished Finders, but I'll say that all of our short-term rentals are a mix of short-term rentals and midterm rentals.
Right,
And I
good
love
point.
that flexibility that midterm rentals allow for you, because we can toggle back and forth from short-term and midterm. But going back to your question, the midterm rental that we have on Furnished Finders, we really wanted to target traveling nurses. After learning that, after having a wonderful set of guests that stayed at our place and understood that there's this demand out there for traveling nurses, which I did not know before their arrival. So we really love that experience to have more revenue generated than a long-term rental, yet have the stability that a midterm rental that generated. I can give you a little bit more specifics on that particular.
Sure.
We received an inquiry for a 2-week stay, and that's pretty typical for either short term or midterm stays. And I understood after communicating with the guests that they are traveling nurses. Her and her boyfriend were both traveling nurses working at the same hospital, and they were not sure how long they really needed to stay because their contracts needed to be renewed at a certain time. And after understanding that, I took a leap of faith and made communicate with them and reserved our calendar for the chance that their contracts would be renewed. And long story short, that 2-week guest turned out to be a 5+ month guest and brought in the same amount of revenue as a short-term rental. So it was incredibly
Wow.
successful turnaround that we're trying to replicate in other areas too.
Excellent.
And tell us, do you plan on doing more midterm rentals in the future, or what's kind of your plan going forward?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. Many of our short-term rentals, we are trying to target the midterm rental guest or demand or customer by using Furnished Finders, for instance, or making ourselves available for longer term stays on other platforms, and marketing ourselves in other avenues as well. So I'll say that all of our furnished rentals have had some form of midterm rental guest. I can give you another example where in one of our properties, what started out as another 2 to 3 week stay from a foreign country, from Europe. And after speaking with them, it sounded like they were in town for business. They were contractors consulting for US based business. And that 2 week guest ended up turning into 4 months. And then after the holiday break, they returned and booked another 3 months.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, so that was we were really happy to see that, and I can talk about how that came to be, but through communication and making sure that their concerns were addressed and allowing them the flexibility to extend their trip, and not, I'm not saying this real well right now, but
you're saying it great.
we had to, obviously we had to reserve our calendar for them, even though they had not completed their booking yet. But that was a kind of a trust that was built that was a high likelihood that would happen. And rather than open our calendars for another 1 week or 2 week guest in between, we ended up being able to capture that very long stay that ended up being cumulative 6 months, which was fantastic.
That's great.
I love that. Well, let's transition to the section we call Landlord Logistics. And there's a series of questions that Young specifically wanted to talk to you guys about. So we're going to start off with how he goes about converting long-term renters into midterm rental guests. He's got a couple examples of that.
Yeah, this was a little bit of happenstance, but definitely by some effort as well on our part. We, as you know, we own some longer term rentals, just regular apartments. And through one of our open apartments, we received an inquiry from a guest who, or it turned out to be a guest, but an inquiry to say that, hey, I'm looking to rent your apartment for 1 to 2 months. Now, a little bit odd request because it's not a furnished home. It's a totally unfurnished, completely remodeled apartment. So I really wanted to understand that better. So I got on the phone and spoke with the individual and understood that they were in the middle of a remodel of their own home. And they needed a place to stay. And hotels were going to be too costly for them. And it really doesn't have the amenities that they need, such as a kitchen, workspace, and so forth. So although they were not inquiring about it, I introduced the idea of, how about a furnished rental? How about one of our furnished rentals? And it was a little bit surprising that thought never crossed their minds. I think maybe they thought that furnished rentals were going to be too expensive, maybe not available for the days that they needed. So we were able to design a contract with one of our furnished rentals to satisfy their need for over a month, and then negotiate on a rate that made sense for them and also made sense for us in a kind of a lower season. So that was a really kind of another success story.
That's great.
That's fantastic. Yeah, there's definitely a demand for that, for higher occupancy places, if you will, that are furnished. And a lot of times people who are in need of that don't think about it, right? I know prior to my days here at Furnished Finder, we were relocating, or we were moving just a couple of miles, but our new house was a new construction house. And like any new construction project, took far longer than we were ever anticipating it would take. And we ended up with about a 6-week gap, which in the grand scheme of things is not that big of a deal. But when you have, we have 2 kids at that time, we had 2 pets. It was a big deal, and we were searching, and I wish that we would have known about Furnished Finder at the time, because although I'm very grateful for my in-laws and their hospitality and welcoming us, it's not the least stressful thing in the world trying to live with your in-laws for 6 weeks. So it is, there's all sorts of different demand out there. And there's all sorts of different needs that furnished rentals can fulfill.
Yeah, and I'll add to say that we've taken advantage of that as well, as my wife and I have moved across the country and back to Los Angeles area. And those relocations, just like you said, are not easy. You end up with gaps where you haven't found your home yet and you need a place to stay, and you don't want to be stuck in a hotel room for weeks on end without a kitchen. So we've definitely stayed at midterm rentals in other cities as well because of our own needs.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's great. So you also wanted to discuss supply management. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you self-manage your properties and you have a W-2 job, a pretty cool one at that. So do you want to let us know, one, what's your W-2? And how do you self-manage the supplies and just the flow of your midterm rentals?
Great. Yeah, my day job is I work in the aerospace defense industry. And I've been doing that for almost 20 years. And on the side, my wife and I have investment properties. The question was related to supply management for midterm rentals.
Yeah, just managing your properties, you're self-managing your properties in general. Mm-hmm. Yeah, what does that look like for the supplies, for the flip process, for contractors coming into the home, all that kind of stuff?
Kelly and I have really been digging into this lately as our number of properties starts to get a little bit higher, and we're like, okay, how are we gonna, the management is a lot different for 1 or 2 properties than it is for 10 to 15.
Very challenging. And I'll say that we haven't found the right solution or model yet. We're constantly in the search of that.
But it hasn't held you back, which is great.
Well, yeah, the show must go on, and there need their shampoos and towels. But yeah, so we do a fair amount of self-management. We try to prepare ahead as much as possible so that we're not there at every turnover. We physically cannot be because we have properties across different states. So one thing to do is we have leveraged some help from our cleaning crew to establish that rapport and relationship to make sure that they are doing stock checks for us and letting us know if we're low on certain supplies, and that they have access to some sort of locked cabinet or closet that they can restock things for us. We've been known to buy supplies for 6 months to a year in advance, and those are very large Costco trips.
I've seen some of those baskets at Costco. A lot of times I feel like they're restaurants, so you're like 100 of the same item. They must have a restaurant.
This is actually interesting because I was just dealing with this. We have a turnover for one of our arbitrages coming up, and obviously I can't have a locked cabinet there because it's not our property. And it's in Iowa where my family lives and I don't live. And we did find a great cleaner, but I'm like, how am I going to make sure?
Why can't you have a locked closet?
Well, because I don't want to change, I would have to replace the doorknob. Plus it's a studio. So there's really not a lot of spare space, right?
Got it.
So I'm like, okay, how am I going to do this? And you just have to get creative, right? I ended up making a tote, like a utility tote. And I put in there probably 6 months to a year's worth of paper towels and Kleenex and toilet paper. And we just labeled it owner supplies and put it up on the high shelf in the laundry closet. But
nice.
I think you're right. You gotta get creative, and there's solutions, but sometimes they're a lot more basic than we think. Sometimes they're not as obvious as we think.
I'm with you because closet space is so important for midterm rentals versus short-term rentals. So like a short-term rental is easy to lock a closet off and for their 2-day stay, no big deal. But you take away some of that space in a midterm rental, you're like, oh no, where are they going to store some stuff? And so sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So I'm with you. I figured out I store a lot of stuff underneath the beds as well, because most people aren't going to place things under the bed. So strategically buying beds that have a large enough gap underneath where one of those totes can fit under.
Oh, that's really smart.
Thank you.
That's really smart. Yeah, it's, you know what? It's interesting. You come up with all these little challenges that you would never think of.
Right.
Okay, my challenge with having an investment property is, where do I store the extra Kleenex? But at the same time, I don't want to, I do have my family there as a fall safe, but I'm trying, we're trying to systematize things so that they don't have to run over there all the time. But yeah, what other tools have you guys found, Young, that work well? And my other question is, does your wife does she lead up kind of the property management of that role, or does she also have a W-2 job?
My wife also has a W-2 job. She's a digital marketing manager at a company. And my wife and I partner really well. I think she handles a lot more of the creative side, as well as setting up a furnished rental. She has the design sense and vision, and I'm more focused on the operations and making things happen on a day-to-day basis. So we definitely handle different aspects of our business. And going back to supply management, just quickly, I think you were touching on what are some of the other thoughts on that. We definitely taken an approach to overstock. I think it's I much rather, and theft will happen. People will take things, but I much rather have some guests take some extra paper towels than a guest that shows up with no toilet paper, right? So that's a risk or a cost I'm willing to absorb to overstock our furnished rentals and check them, on a monthly or quarterly basis, and making sure that all the supplies are well stocked and they're comfortable.
That's smart because, you will have a few things that guests take home, like you're saying, but is it worth the extra 20% or 30% for a property management company, or do you want to just restock a few more items? So that's a great way of looking at it. I like that. So you have navigated relationship management well from what we've talked about in a previous conversation, and turning guests into 5-star reviews that may not have started out that way. So I'd love for you to be able to share your experience there and how you ensure 5-star reviews for your properties.
Yeah, we have so many examples. A few come to mind, and to me, I think again, it's not about. It's more than success. Can be defined by having a wonderful stay with a guest, but it would be even more fantastic if they came back and they wanted to stay with you again, or they told their friends or family about, hey, I stayed at a wonderful place. So we do our best, truly the best, our best to communicate with our guests and customers, in our sense, to make sure all their needs are met reasonably, right? So if they are too cold or too warm, or in one case we had a guest who was particularly sensitive to street noise, and I'll say that one of our furnished rentals is on a major street, but it isn't particularly loud. But they were particularly sensitive to noise. So just a small example, that day at my lunch break, I went out and purchased earplugs. And later on, we ordered a noise canceling machine to be sent over to the furnished rental. So what turned out, the point is not necessarily about the noise or the cancellation. It's about they had somewhat of a negative first impression of our home. And they felt strongly enough to express that. And because of the things that we did, they were very thankful. In the end, when they left, they gave us raving reviews. So what could have been a negative review was averted. And in fact, we gained an ally.
That is amazing, because I just had a similar situation from someone staying in a different property. It was a short-term rental property that they had found on a short-term rental site. And exactly what you're saying, it was close to a highway or a main road. There was more traffic noise than they realized. But it wasn't just that. Then on top of that, it's like the lighting was kind of dim and the hosts, weren't communicating that well. So what you've turned into a successful 5-star review that gives you that superhost status on Airbnb. Others don't always navigate well. And so he reached out to us and was willing to double pay. And we did navigate that conversation. I was like, I don't want you to have to pay the full price to stay with our at our place a month early and still have to pay for your Airbnb. But I do have to cover my mortgage as well. So we were willing to, work with him and create that 5-star experience for him. And he's loving our home. That's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath. There's a lot of natural light. So it was a great experience that could have worked out in the Airbnb or the short-term rental site, just like yours, if that host had taken the initiative. So that's a really good point. Just like we're in hospitality, we're not long-term rentals. You can kind of skate with some of that stuff. But in general, treat others as the way you want to be treated, right? And so these midterm rentals and short-term rentals, you want to give them the best experience possible within reason, right? Like some requests, maybe that doesn't make sense, or you have to work that into your strategy over time. But that's really good advice. Katie, you got anything to add to that?
Well, I think it's all in how you look at it, right? Because you can look at feedback from a tenant as, like, this is so annoying, or I have to deal with this or whatever. Or you can look at it as an opportunity to make your impression as a landlord. Because if your tenant moves in and everything goes very smoothly, you have very limited chances to make an impression on your tenant, right? You have your first impression, you have the impression of the process, where they're signing the lease and doing the background check, and then when they're moving in. But after that, it's a very limited communication, and unless anything goes wrong. But I'm thinking of one instance where we had a tenant where the ice maker wasn't working, and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so annoying. Also, as a landlord, ice makers are my nemesis. I hate them. Every ice maker that I have ever had has broken. Like, it doesn't matter. We have a long-term rental that we've had for coming up on 3 years. I've had to fix that dang ice maker every single year. It doesn't matter. It's just, they're just the worst. Mm-hmm. And so this poor travel nurse moves in and she's like, hey, I don't want to be a bother. I know I just moved in and I don't want to complain about things, but the ice maker's not working. And I'm like, no, that's not a complaint. You should have ice. And I was like, I know the fridge at this place is older. I'm not paying to fix it. So I ordered a $99 countertop ice maker, and it makes like the cute little like nugget ice that everyone loves. And I was like, I just ordered this. It'll be on your doorstep in 2 days, thanks to Amazon. And she unpackaged it. She figured it out. She got it on the countertop working, and she was so happy. She was so happy. And I'm like, this situation turned from you don't have ice to now you're like a great fan, right? And like, I know that she'll leave us a great review when she moves out. So it's an opportunity to kind of show your hospitality and your service. So I think every time an obstacle comes up, everyone needs to really remember that and kind of remember how you approach it.
Completely.
I'm going to have to throw my plug in. I don't do it too often, but reminder for those of you who are avid listeners for the show, I love American Home Shield. Not everyone does, and I never call. That doesn't work well. But I put in my request through the online portal, and one of those, Katie, was an ice maker not working. And so I put in the $85 request. I think it might have, I think the high end is $125, which is not bad for someone to come out and fix your ice machine. And so what happened is it was an older fridge. They weren't able to replace it for a reasonable price. So instead, they gave us a brand new $1,400 to $1,600 fridge. It was amazing.
Yeah, that might be something at some point that I look into, because I have also replaced a dryer and a dishwasher this year
I've gotten 2 dryers, 3 hot water heaters over the last 2 or 3 years. It's amazing. I like American Home Shield. Not everybody loves home warranties, but I must put that plug in.
Hey, if you find a good one, that's definitely worth sharing. So I think that's very valuable information, because that is, and I'd be interested, Young, to see, because you have so many doors, to see if you've ever dealt with a high level repair like that, because that's always my worst nightmare, is like when I get an ice maker is one thing. I hate them. But the bigger one is the furnace or the water heater. As soon as I get a call that, hey, the heater's not kicking on, or I don't have hot water, I'm like, oh, please let this be a bad furnace filter or something, because that's going to hit hard.
Yeah, I'd love to hear Young's.
Yeah, speaking of major repairs, about 6 months ago, we had a major issue with one of our properties, and it was an out-of-state property. And we got a call that there was some moisture that was observed in the basement utility room. Long story short, it turned out to be a sewer line backup, and that needed not only be snaked, but that didn't work. And then it needed to be hydrojetted. And in the process of doing so, it collapsed and needed to be completely replaced to the city main. So it was a very challenging couple of weeks, when not only is it very costly to repair and unpleasant to do so, we were also not even in the state to handle it. So through managing, remotely, really good contractors and some support help that we have in the local area, we were able to get it repaired eventually after a large bill.
What did you learn from that experience?
What I learned is that buy HomeServe, which is a insurance service that covers many different things, but sewer line is one of the things they cover. And in some of the older homes, this one was over 100 years old. We should have spent that $6 a month very early on and covered ourselves, and that could have been handled very easily rather than coming out of pocket. So that was one lesson. Good advice. Another lesson learned was that don't skip on doing a full scope of the drain line. In this particular case, we have so many. We've acquired properties throughout the years, and every time we do a scope of the sewer line, it always comes back, oh, it looks fine. It looks like there was a repair done at one point. You should be good to go. In this particular case, we were in a rush. We trusted the we trusted the seller that they had a recent repair done. So we skipped the scoping. Terrible idea. We would have caught it if we inspected it properly and spent that $400 to do so.
That's good advice. Yep. We learn lessons every time. But guess what? Reminder, we say this on the show quite a bit. Don't let that stop you from jumping in. Mm-hmm. Analysis paralysis is like the worst thing, because one, it's never going to be perfect. You're always going to come up with challenges. Go at it with an educated and confident plan. Know where you want to be, but don't put yourself in a paralysis state where you never get started. Just get started.
Yeah, I mean, I'll add to that. We have a property in Cape Coral, Florida, right where Hurricane Ian went through. I mean, right. Like, it was like dead center. And that, we took a hit. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we'll be profitable this year, because of it. But when I look back, my instinct is to say, what a failure, right? Like, the first year we have the property, we have this major natural disaster. We're going to end up, in the red. And then I'm like, wait, the thing about real estate, if you do it right and you wait long enough, it'll sort itself out, right? So we'll get a new roof out of it, right? We'll get new repairs out of it. The city is going to get a natural kind of makeover from it, because so many things are going to be new. And also, when you have a rental, no matter what your profit margin is, even if it's small, you'll eventually make up for it. It just kind of adjusts the timeline. So I do think that's one thing that's really beneficial and helps to offset that analysis paralysis you're talking about, Kelly, because that is real. And it's something that is difficult to swallow sometimes, but
yeah, it's like have your reserves.
Have your reserves, have a plan, and then know that this isn't something that, at least most of the time, you're trying to get in and out of like right away.
Yeah, and I'll say that, just going back to your point, it is daunting. If you hear about everybody's landlord horror stories, it may be very overwhelming and maybe too scary to step into. But, I think an encouragement to everybody out there who's maybe thinking about doing so, there's a solution or multiple solutions for every situation. And you learn so much throughout that process, and you come out more resilient, stronger, wiser, and, you eventually be in a position where you can coach somebody else. It's just part of life.
So I just want to wrap it up with one more question from myself, and then anything that you might want to add, Katie or Young, to wrap up our conversation. But in regards, we typically end with Furnished Finder favorites. And in our intro call, you mentioned that you really like the section about hospital locations, and that you also like the structure of including that the guest gets vetted in the process. So let's dive into those two a little bit and what you really like about those features.
Sure. Yeah. One of the many features I like about Furnished Finder is the proximity that we can list how close we are to the local hospitals. And again, like I said, we're targeting traveling nurses. I think the particular feature that doesn't exist for other, platforms such as Airbnb and VRBO. One other thing we like a lot is also state-specific lease resources that Furnished Finder links us to, because when you're operating out of multiple states, you may not be privy to all the local regulatory compliance type documents, and to have that resource available for landlords, furnished landlords, is very powerful. And the last thing I like to mention about Furnished Finder is I love getting an alerts that somebody in your particular area is looking for housing. So they may not have clicked on your listing yet. They may not have inquired about your listing yet. And they may not know what the local neighborhoods are, but you know that they are looking. And that's your great opportunity to reach out and build a connection, and perhaps market your furnished rental for them.
Yes, definitely. We had a conversation recently with another guest about, insurance companies and relocation services. And so many of us see the tenant leads coming in, but don't realize how easy it is for medical recruiters and insurance agencies and relocation services to place a housing request. It's such a unique feature that isn't available on other sites that I'm aware of, that it allows a company to save hours of time by filling out a short form of, hey, these are the dates that I'll need. This is the space I'll need. This is the location I'll need. Here's the type of family that will be traveling. Whatever details you want to give about yourself or those that you're looking to replace in a business setting, you can put all that information in a housing request that takes 2 minutes. Press submit, and it goes to every landlord in that city, and they reach out to you if they have a property that matches. And so rather than searching the site through hundreds or thousands of properties, you have the 5 or 10 or 20 that come directly into your inbox that we're referring to on our end, the landlord end, as tenant leads. We're like, ding, got another one. Let's reach out to them, see if they need our assistance. So yeah, it goes both ways. Landlords and travelers have such useful tools through the housing requests and the tenant leads that I think are unmatched on other sites a lot of times. That is great feedback. Thank you, Young. Any last things you think the audience needs to hear from you about just your real estate experience? Any favorite books that have changed your life or the way you think? what's your last thoughts for everyone?
I'll just say that it's been a pleasure to share a little glimpse of my experience with you and your listeners. I hope someone out there finds this useful, what I'm sharing. And if there's anything anybody wants to follow up on, feel free to reach out through Furnished Finders, and happy to answer the questions.
Excellent. And we do put your link to your profile, to your Furnished Finder profile in the show notes on YouTube, and I've been adding them to the audio version wherever you get your podcasts as well. So yes, reach out to Young, make that connection if you'd like. If you want to hear about any specific topics or have a question, post it on our YouTube channel. We love getting those and responding or incorporating them into future episodes. So don't forget to subscribe or leave a review if you haven't done so yet. Thank you so much for being with us, Young, and we wish you a successful year with your real estate portfolio.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you so much, Katie. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you.